What's up, Lore Masters? This episode is a part of the Genesis to Babylon 5 series. It is suggested that you watch this series from the beginning. You can click in the top right hand corner to ensure you don't miss anything. With that out of the way, let's just get into it. Have you ever seen, in fiction, an empire that had the greatest of intentions, that rose to prominence and wanted to safeguard their neighbors, other species, and their friends, but ultimately couldn't even defend themselves? A people that were stalwart but couldn't stop the tide of darkness. The Centauri are the exact opposite of that. You can't even classify the government of the Centauri people without getting into some controversy. On paper, the Centauri is classified as a republic. However, while being a republic, it is also considered a constitutional monarchy, and honestly, the Centauri Republic in practice plays more like an authoritarian dictatorship. Lending to its republic nomenclature, the Centaurum is the only check to the monarch's power, the monarch also being known as the emperor, and of course if there was no monarch, then there would be a regent. Comprising the major noble houses, the Centaurum is able to override the rulings of the emperor with only 3/4 of the vote. Most sources claim that this practice was very rare, however. Additionally, at least one emperor would have his enemies within the Centaurum killed to ensure his rule was absolute, and I think it is due to that we see this rarity, and the threat on the lives of those in the Centaurum would ensure that the emperor was unopposed. The history of the Centauri feels like it can be cut into 3 or 4 separate eras, at least to me. When looking at the beginning of the Centauri, we see the Centauri Empire being founded under Emperor Toscano. He would create the first royal palace and commission the palace guard. This period of time underwent possibly one of the most defining moments for the Centauri themselves and how they would act in the future. It was during this time that the Centauri made first contact with another sentient species that was also native to their planet. This species would be known as the Zonos. What exactly occurred between the two species isn't the easiest to parse together, but we do know that there was a horrific war where both sides endured staggering losses. The war was so catastrophic that traditions, like the celebration of life, was incorporated into Centauri culture. The celebration of life specifically counted how many Centauri were left alive as a celebration. Now, if that's not morbid, I don't know what the hell is. As we see with many species during wars, religion became prominent with the Centauri. Mythos revolving around the emperors making deals with the gods to become immortals had the effect of great buildings and idols being crafted that are still visited to the present. For me, we see the next era after the defeat of the Zonos and the extermination of the Zonos in about 1258. This saw the rise of the Centauri Republic, in large part due to General Kuro. Kuro had the help of technomages, something we'll get into a bit later, and ultimately would become the emperor. Not being vain at all, he had a jewel created that was to be given to every emperor after him, and this jewel, of course, has the sigil of House Kuro itself. It ultimately became the symbol of Centauri power. The Centauri, again, found themselves in a war against a species known as the Shogrin. Kuro successfully defeated this threat, and the Centauri people began to expand into the stars and what I consider to be the next era. The discovery and decrypting of jump gate technology catapulted the Centauri into what most resources call a golden age. The Centauri was the second most powerful power, only to that of the Minbari. They expanded and enslaved multiple races, their empire growing vastly. From everything I've seen in the series and read, the Centauri, or at least its government, was generally a malevolent force. They manipulated less advanced races, at least the ones they weren't enslaving, towards their own whims. I think it can best be personified in their enslavement of the Narn and the ravaging of the Narn's home planet. They continue to strip mine the Narn homeworld and other Narn colonies until ultimately pushed out by the Narn resistance. And don't worry, the Centauri being repelled by the Narn is something I'm going to be going more in depth about in a future episode. Another example of Centauri malevolence is that of the first contact with the Earth Alliance. The Centauri opted not to enslave humanity, but attempted to allow human hubris to destroy themselves. They began to trade with the humans, giving them access to their own jump gates and then ultimately selling them jump gate technology. The leaders of the Centauri figured that the humans would bring about their own destruction. This, of course, would take care of a potential threat and possibly open up opportunities for annexation. Ironically, the Centauri didn't realize how close to being right they ultimately would be. The problem with the Centauri, as we see in a lot of science fiction, is their decadence and exploitation. At the start of the Golden Age, the Centauri were thirsty for knowledge, thirsty for understanding. Technology advanced and their empire grew, but as they continued through the stars, relatively unopposed, they stopped innovating. They found themselves rarely challenged and so allowed their empire to stagnate. At this time, the Centauri had vast territories, but didn't create the infrastructure to manage it. This allowed other races, like the Narn, to rise up against them. Their power and influence would slowly degrade throughout the galaxy. It's my opinion that this would be why the Centauri ultimately decided to help out the Dilgar, giving them a foothold within space. They wanted to regain the dominance over the Narn and a restoration of their republic. Though, curiously, it appears that the Centauri stayed out of the conflict after their initial assistance. At least that's what they say, letting the other powers fight it out. Staying out of wars is something the Centauri apparently would grow accustomed to doing. We see this during the Earth-Minbari War itself. Though, elements of the Centauri did try to warn the humans before the war began. The really only major role the Centauri played during the Earth-Minbari War is to commit a surprise attack upon a secret meeting between the Minbari and the humans. This ensured that neither side would have peace. However, the attack was due to the Centauri believing the meeting to be a weapons trade agreement between the humans and the Narn, and not the peace meeting that it was. After the surrender of the Minbari and the creation of Babylon 5, the Centauri would send representatives. The descent of the Centauri people, however, would continue to be drastic and nuanced. As time progressed, the Centauri would play a role in helping different factions at different times. They would make enemies of many races, and ultimately Centauri Prime would find itself assaulted. The fate of the Centauri, at least as far as we are led to believe, would ultimately change when a Centauri known as Vir became the Emperor and possibly brought the Centauri back into a second Golden Age. Now, I'll be honest, there is a lot more to this during the run of Babylon 5, and I intend to get more into it with the Centauri, so don't worry, I know I glossed over a couple of things. Throughout time, Centauri technology after the Golden Age was considered highly advanced, if not a little crude, and its military was always feared. This would be even after the advancements of the Centauri stagnated at the end of the Golden Age itself. The Centauri had created a vast empire at its height that had at least 4 colonies and various slave nations that they pretended to call protectorates. But all of this was reduced to a fraction of what their empire was, and it appears to have stayed that way for a very long time. From everything I've read, from everything I've seen, I have very little sympathy for the Centauri. They consistently seem to be the baddies of this universe, even when they're helping out the quote-unquote good guys. But those are my opinions. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.